Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Smackdown Stew Report / Stew's News combo episode today. The reason why it's a combo episode, we're going to look at the Montreal Screwjob, as this week was 28 years that it happened, the 28th year anniversary, the 28th anniversary, rather, of the Montreal Screwjob. Also, we're going to talk about the STM strike, the new strike. This weekend, commuters will not be happy. And as you can see, the Montreal Canadiens game is on behind me. They're in the first intermission. The Habs are losing 1-0. Jacob Dobesh is in nets, and we'll see. Hopefully, the Canadiens could come back. So we're going to get started, and I want to read you the article. We're going to start off with the bus strike. I want to read you the article, the information on the CTV Montreal website they say about it. So Montreal commuters will have to do without public transit this weekend. Yep, you heard me right. The Administrative Labor Tribunal on Wednesday evening authorized the STM drivers union to hold a 48-hour strike, meaning there'll be no bus or metro services in Montreal from 4 a.m. on November 15th to 3:59 a.m. on November 17th if no agreement is reached between the union and the STM. These are the bus drivers and the metro operators and the ticket takers. The maintenance workers strike, they called off their strike yesterday and the service resumed. Paratransit, however, will continue without any impact on the service. Of course, the union already had a one-day strike on the 31st that shut down the STM service, well, the 1st of November, that shut it down for the day. And, of course, the late night ruling comes the same day as a union representing maintenance workers halted their strike. That union that adopted a strike mandate from November 1st to 28th, limiting service to rush hours only. But as of 6 a.m. on Wednesday, service gradually resumed before operations returned to normal today. The tribunal's ruling Wednesday evening noted that it considered feedback from various stakeholders who would be affected, including the Montreal Trudeau Airport, Montreal Public Health, and others, but ultimately decided that the limited service provided for an agreement were sufficient. The tribunal considers that the issues and concerns raised by the various stakeholders are important, but do not constitute a danger to public health or safety, as stated in the news release. Thus, the evidence does not show that the interruption of STM services for the weekend, with the exception of paratransit, represents a clear, imminent, and real threat to life, safety, health, and security of the population. So, that's what the tribunal says, the Administrative Labor Tribunal, and I find that absolutely disgusting. That there's no real threat to life, safe, health, and security of the population. That's 100% false. Look, there's nurses in the healthcare system and caregivers and PABs and orderlies who rely on public transport to get to their jobs. There's home caregivers who, and a lot of them rely on public transit. And if they don't, and who are middle class, who cannot afford a bus ticket not a bus ticket, but cannot afford to take an Uber or a taxi where they're going. I had a caregiver for a relative, and they had to take public transport. So what's going to end up happening, and you can see it, there'll be a lot of absences at work, and this weekend. Doesn't matter which business, restaurants, shopping centers, caregivers, nurses. There'll be a lot of absences because they'll say, we don't, we're not going to pay a high price of Uber because Uber will raise their prices. There'll be a surge because there'll be a demand, and so people will just stay home. And if it's a caregiver, that could be dangerous. There's elderly people who depend on the CLSC and nurses or caregivers or even private caregivers to come and give them medication and food. And if some people take medication a few times a day, and if that person doesn't show up, they don't get their medication. That's dangerous. The elderly people are left alone, or a PAB, or a nurse who's responsible for a floor, They may say, no, we're not going to show up, and they, it'll jeopardize the care and the quality of service. So that's totally wrong. And their seniors who need to get food. They go around, and get out of the house. They some, that people need to, who can't afford Ubers or taxis and need to take their children or need to go to a clinic because they're not feeling well, won't be able to. So how can they say it will not cause safety or health issues? Also, if the weather's bad, snowstorm, freezing rain, things like that, people who work will have to walk to work in those conditions, and they may hurt themselves instead of being on a bus, or it'll be freezing to get to work. Nurses especially, and and people who are shift workers. In the last strike, Simon, the store downtown Montreal, Simon's, paid Ubers for their employees to come to work. It's absolutely unbelievable that they say that it poses no risk to the life, safety, health, or security of the population. Of course it does. What if somebody late at night or in the evening, now it gets dark earlier, they'd be on a bus, but they'd have to walk. They can get attacked, they can get robbed. So how can they say it's not, it doesn't affect health, safety, and the security? That's totally unbelievable. People want to go to the Bell Center to watch a hockey game. Well, that's, and it costs them a lot. But no, you can't say it doesn't put the safety and health of the population at risk, especially caregivers. They don't think about that. A lot of them rely on public transport to get to different clients, and give them medication or give them food. It makes it tough. At least have some service. I don't understand why the STM, the public transit, is not considered an essential service. People need to get from A to B. People who don't have cars, and also the other risk that it poses is more cars on the road. People will be taking their cars who normally would take public transport to work because of the strike, and more cars will be on the road. And if the weathers are dangerous, more cars, meaning more accidents. So it's absolutely unbelievable. And even François Legault, Premier François Legault, and the CAC will not step in. They will not force them back to work because the tribunal said it's their right to strike. So it's unbelievable. How can they say that? We're going to probably hear a lot of horror stories after the weekend's over about people trying to get to work and not being able to get to work. And you could share them here. You could send an email to the Smackdown Stew channel at gmail.com. That's Smackdown Stew channel at gmail.com. And I could share some of the stories because it's absolutely unbelievable that about this bus strike. It doesn't make sense to me that they don't offer some service. Okay, they feel it's the weekend and it doesn't matter. People get sick on the weekend. People need caregivers on the weekend. People have appointments. People need to go shopping who can't afford Ubers or taxis, People, people need to get everywhere, and it's dangerous. And I don't agree with that. The tribunal should have come up with, okay, if you're doing essential service during the week when for the maintenance strike, you can narrow it down a little bit on the weekend, but have some service instead of the morning rush hour. Instead of starting the service at 6, start at 6:30 or 7 and make it to 10, and then you can go in the evening. You can go and start it again from 4 to 6 or whatever. But not to have service at all on the weekend is just not right. It's not right, and the tribunal made a big mistake. People should be writing them. People should be writing the government because it's a mistake. It's a big, 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 big mistake that what they're doing, and so it's a very big mistake that what they're doing, and I don't agree with it, and it's terrible. And the Canadians just got scored on. It's 2-0 for Dallas, and it's terrible. The Canadians, anyway, but it's terrible. The strike. It doesn't make sense to me what they're doing. People need to get around, and we'll keep an eye on it. We'll see. They say they're not far from an agreement. The bus drivers and metro drivers and ticket takers. Hopefully, there'll be an agreement reached between now and when the strike is supposed to start, so that it'll avert that. But no bus or metro service on the weekend. No, I don't agree with that. Now we're going to change gears into the Smackdown Stu report. The Montreal Screwjob. I was there on November 9th, 1997 at the Bell Center, which was called the Molson Center right here in Montreal. I witnessed the Montreal Screwjob. I was confused. I was like, what was going on? But I want to give you a little backstory of what happened. So in late 1992, going into 1993, after WrestleMania 8, of course, Vince McMahon was being indicted with the steroids. There was talk about it. And the WWE, or at the time WWF, did not want to put wrestlers who wrestlers were bigger, who looked like they were on steroids, at the forefront. And they were thinking of who to put the title on. And, they were thinking of who to put the title on. And they said, why not Bret? Bret was trustworthy. So, and now there's and Alex No Hook looks like he's hurt with the Canadians. Alex No Hook went down, and that's not good. Oh boy. So anyway, Bret Hart. So they put the title on Bret. He beat Ric Flair on an episode of Monday Night Raw because Flair was going back to WCW, and he would lose a loser leaves WWF match to Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig, on another edition of Raw. So Bret was the champion, and he held the title. And at WrestleMania 9, he was told he was supposed to retain it, but they changed the finish to allow Hogan to win the title and have one last run until King of the Ring, where he lost it to Yokozuna, which set up WrestleMania 10, where Bret Hart defeated Yokozuna in that double championship match with Lex Luger. With Lex Luger. Now, so he won the title. He actually had a run with that title, but at Survivor Series, he had a feud with Bob Backlund. Bob Backlund won the title, but the WWF decided to go a different way, and Diesel beat him in 15 seconds in Madison Square Garden to win the title. Bret continued the feud with Bob Backlund at WrestleMania 11, which saw Michaels and Diesel battle for the title. Diesel won, of course. And then at Survivor Series 1996, Bret Hart defeated Diesel at the Survivor Series and took the championship back. Now, the other issue, and then so it took the title back, and that set up the Iron Man match with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 12, and that match was all scripted, was all planned by Bret and Shawn, and even the part where Bret was pissed off about going to sudden death, and then Bret Hart leaving in disgust when Shawn Michaels beat him in sudden death. That was all planned, as Bret was took a 7-month leave of absence from the WWF to film Lonesome Dove, the TV show. And it was within that time he was mulling offers from WCW and WWF. He actually turned down an offer by WCW. And he turned down a decline and turned down an $8.4 million offer, a 3-year offer from WCW. Instead, he opted to sign an unprecedented 20-year deal offered by Vince McMahon which would see him be the highest paid wrestler in WWF and secure him a major role with WWF management once he retired. And it saw this contract, they both, Bret and WWF, saw a contract as an expression of the mutual loyalty. But of course, by 1997, WWE was facing financial difficulties because of the stiff competition with WCW, and Vince McMahon could not honor the contract, and said that he would facilitate his way in going to WCW. Now, so he did get a contract with WCW, Bret Hart, and he, and McMahon believed that he made the right choice by pressing Hart to return, which kept him from joining the WCW in 1996. But by 97, there was problems, and he reneged on the deal. Now, and also, McMahon, he told Hart he would not honor the contract if he chose to stay. But when Hart talked to McMahon about the future plans and storylines, he was disappointed, and 3-0 for Dallas. They were disappointed by McMahon's response and what he considered as lackluster suggestions, because at the time he felt that his career had been sabotaged by the changes to his character, which had been retooled as an anti-American, and he was only cheered in Canada and in Europe, and he was booed in the US, and it wouldn't have worked. So he did sign with WCW, and the plan, he had at SummerSlam 97, he regained the title from the Undertaker, because the Undertaker had the belt in a match where Shawn Michaels was a special guest referee. He ended up spinning in Shawn Michaels' face. Shawn Michaels took a chair to hit Bret. Bret ducked. Chair hit the Undertaker, and Shawn Michaels counted the Undertaker out, and Bret Hart won the title. Now, Vince McMahon wanted Bret Hart to drop the title to Shawn Michaels at Survivor Series in Montreal, because but Bret Hart said no, he wouldn't do the same for me. I'm not going to put him over unless he puts me over, because they had a conversation saying, okay, I'm going to drop it to you, Shawn. I'm going to protect you. You can feel safe. And he's like, I appreciate that, but I'm not going to do the same thing for you. So it left a bad taste in his mouth. And according to Bret, what was supposed to happen, what was Bret was led to believe, was that because he didn't want to drop the belt in Canada, the original finish called for a big schmoz where the referee would get knocked out, which would be Earl Hebner. Mike Chioda would jump in the ring, but there would be a big brawl between the Hart Foundation and Triple H and China, and it would be a double disqualification. Bret would explain his actions the next night on Raw and eventually drop it at another time or relinquish the title and say his goodbyes. But Vince McMahon, it's not that he didn't trust Bret Hart. Vince McMahon didn't trust Eric Bischoff to go on Nitro, which aired an hour earlier, and say we signed the WWF champion. So he said he needed to preemptively strip Hart of the title. So the whole week they were going back and forth between Bret and Shawn Michaels. There was a meeting with Vince Russo and Jim Cornette in Vince McMahon's house, and they had tried to lay out ideas. You can't. He said Vince McMahon asked Bret, "But you lose in Detroit and win, on the Saturday," and he said no. First of all, he didn't want to lose in Canada, and the second, he was billed as a champion the next night in Montreal, so he said no. Now, Vince Russo and Jim Cornette put out the idea that let Shawn Michaels put Bret in the sharpshooter and have the referee call for the bell, and have the referee call for the bell. So what was supposed, the referee is supposed to be unconscious, which Patterson suggested. Then the rest of the match was planned to proceed. Thus, Hart would grab Michaels' foot, reverse the hold, putting him in the sharpshooter, and then the big schmaz would happen. And Earl Hebner, who was the referee, unbeknownst to McMahon and the crew, spoke to Bret Hart. Well, Bret Hart spoke to Earl Hebner on a plane. He bought him a first-class seat and said, listen, they're going to try and screw me, Earl. Promise me you're not going to count me out. He says, I won't do it. And before the match, at one point, Briscoe and Patterson grabbed Hebner and said, this is what's going to happen. And Hebner was like, I can't do that. I just told him I wouldn't. And Briscoe says, well, who feeds your kids? Who puts food on your table? So, and and Michaels gave a look to Hebner after he put the sharpshooter, to look as if he knew he was in on it. Now, what happened was I saw Vince McMahon come down to the ring with Sergeant Slaughter, and I was like, what's going on here? So what ended up happening was when Shawn Michaels put Bret in the sharpshooter, McMahon yelled, ring the bell, ring the bell, ring the bell. And, Hebner said, ring the bell, and McMahon nudged the timekeeper, ring the effing bell, ring the fucking bell. And he rang it, and it ended the pay-per-view. The home audiences were, the arena audience knew what was going on, but the home audience was confused because at the end, Jim Ross said, good night from Montreal. And he was annoyed that he didn't know about it. But after McMahon said, this way you cannot say that you didn't know. That you cannot say that you didn't know and lie. Now you could say you didn't know. So after that, of course, Bret Hart started throwing cameras and breaking, the announce table and breaking cameras, and then he painted WCW in the air, and then it went off. And of course, there was that alleged fight in the shower where Vince got punched in the face. Now, there's a few things about that. The questions arose was it planned? Was Bret Hart in on the screw job? I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Scott Hall in the Dark Side of the Ring documentaries, the documentary, The Dark Side of the Ring, the one on the Montreal screw job, mentioned a few things that got you thinking. He mentioned a few things. He said, listen, after that, right, Bret spit in Vince McMahon's face. Scott Hall says, you can't tell me, the truck would say, go tight on Vince, if Vince didn't know, they didn't know what was going on, or show the WCW on camera and painting it in the air. So maybe the truck, the production truck was in on it. That I don't know. The black eye, the shiner that Vince McMahon showed the night after looked kind of, looked like it was a makeup job. You never know. But to me, but to this day, Bret Hart says no, he was not aware of it. Shawn Michaels did admit that he was, and in the and they sat down on a DVD, the Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels, the rivalries, and they sat down for an interview with Jim Ross, where they say that they're talking about what was going on and that things got personal and that Shawn Michaels did know and that knew about it, and they were talking about it simply, and this was going on and that was going on, and so they talked about it. That's a great documentary. They revealed some things in the back, and after that that created the Mr. McMahon character. And as Jim Cornette said, nobody thought Bret Hart a um, coming from a wrestling background that preached kayfabe would break kayfabe and come out and reveal the details. And he did in interviews and off the record. And WCW did a poor job of integrating him. They tried. They came out and they dissed Vince McMahon. They had him come out and prevent Hulk Hogan from winning the title and not letting Sting get screwed. It was a little bit, but it wasn't. It could have been better. It could have been better done. It could have been better done his arrival in WCW, but that was short lived because of Goldberg, because of the kick, and of course he wasn't in it after Owen Hart passed away. He thought that Vince McMahon killed Owen Hart because of him, which was not true. But the Montreal Screwjob, you see, people to this day, is it a work? Is it a shoot? Was Bret in on it? And even they were afraid, because there was a part of the match that was in a crowd. They were afraid that Shawn Michaels would get beat in the crowd because what he said about with the Canadian flag. But Shawn Michaels just ran out of the building. Jim Cornette beat Hebner out of the building. He told his brother Earl Hebner to get the bag, and he jumped over the boards and went and left Montreal. And he told Vince McMahon, "I'm screwed now. Everybody's gonna against me in the locker room." So the next night on Raw, Vince McMahon had a meeting with all the talent and said, "Don't blame Earl. He's listening to me. This is on me. I'm the one. Don't you dare blame him. If you have a problem with that, you can leave." Mick Foley pulled a no-show because he was annoyed. But it was something that was, that made history. Bret Hart didn't pass the torch, but look, for me, he should have passed the torch to Shawn Michaels. He was there till December. He should have passed the torch of the Survivor Series. But it was crazy. That was the first evidence of that they actually and Vince McMahon came on the record and said Bret screwed Bret. It's a time-honored tradition. So they started to open the curtain or pull down the curtain a little bit to show, because Bret Hart was saying things and they kind of pulled the curtain and raise the curtain a little bit to see. I know that kind of hypocritical, because the year before, Vince McMahon was outraged, even though he let Shawn Michaels do it, of the Madison Square Garden break of kayfabe when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, Razor Ramon and Diesel, were leaving to go to WCW. And they were leaving to go to WCW, and they had a big hug in the cage, in the cage match, and he was annoyed. But what did he do? He turned around and did the same thing. Rose the curtain, because people wanted, more real storylines, and that led to the Mr. McMahon character. But to this day, Bret Hart swears up and down that he did not know of the screw job. He did not know what was happening. So we're going to leave it there. That is the Smackdown Stu and Stu's News combo for today. Don't forget to like the episode and subscribe to the Smackdown, the Stu Network. And we're going to keep you updated on the STM strike. Hopefully it'll be averted and there won't be a strike. Habs down 3-0. 3/4 of the way of the second period. This is pathetic. And hopefully they'll come back in the third period, but we'll have to see. This is Smackdown Stu saying ciao for now.